continuing to be held at a Garda station in connection with the disappearance and murder of Kyran Dernan. The woman in her 50s was arrested this morning. Jessica Woodlock reports.
Today's arrest is the third arrest in connection with the investigation into the disappearance and murder of Kyran Dernan. Two other people, a man and a woman, were previously arrested on two separate occasions and were later released without charge. Gardaí believe Kyran Dernan was last seen alive in June 2022 at the age of 6. He was reported missing in August 2024. This evening, Gardaí are continuing to question a woman in her 50s in a Garda station in the east. A house in Drogheda in County Louth is also being searched.
A teenager has been seriously injured in an assault in Dublin. It happened on the Tulka Valley Road in Finglas at around 3:30 yesterday afternoon. The boy, in his late teens, has been taken to Beaumont Hospital for treatment. The government needs to start listening to young people if it wants to prevent them from emigrating. That's the message from a young Sinn Féin councillor who says she's leaving her role in the local authority due to the cost of living crisis. Councillor Nia Farrell announced she was moving to Australia on social media this morning. The 26-year-old says she and many others feel neglected by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
They're putting investment into banks, into businesses, into landlords. Like, that's where they're investing their money. They're not investing money in, skilled professionals and young people into working class communities. That's not where their money is going, and you can see that because so many of us have just got to a point where it's like, this is just not good enough. We deserve better, we deserve more investment in us to live here and contribute to our own country.
So-called bin raiders are costing Dublin hundreds of thousands of euro worth of damage. Almost €500,000 was spent last year fixing damage caused by people searching bins for bottles and cans to avail of the return deposit scheme. A spokesperson for Return says it's working with the council on practical solutions. Colin O'Byrne, project manager at Voice Ireland, says Germany has a simple solution.
In Germany, what's happened is they've inculcated a culture where people just leave their bottles and cans beside the bins and people take them away. And that appears to lead to less scavenging. So there's a cultural, behavioural thing going on there. Now, whether the Irish can do what the Germans can, that's up for debate.
The government will return the free summer meals provided last year to tackle the child food poverty problem. In 2025, the Holiday Meals pilot programme was launched with great success and fed 40,000 children through UBU, Your Place, Your Space Youth Services. Senator Linda Nelson-Murray says the programme should cover all holidays and must become permanent.
It should be rolled out at Christmas as well. It shouldn't just be summertime. We need to look at this for Christmas and we need to look at it for Easter too. Because as I said, if those children are dependent on food at school, they're also going to be dependent when the schools are on leave.
More than 8 million cigarettes have been seized at Dublin Airport with an estimated value of over €7.7 million. They were found in a container which had arrived from Rotterdam and were declared as cardboard confectionery. Detector dog Kobe helped with the seizure. And today is potentially the hottest May day ever. Provisional data from Met Éireann shows two stations have recorded highs of 28.8 degrees Celsius. If confirmed, it would beat the current record of 28.4. Alan O'Reilly from Carla Weather outlines what parts of the country saw the hottest temperatures today.
We have provisionally set a new May record high temperature today, with two climatic stations of Met Éireann reporting 28.8 degrees so far as a high today. Wow. Beating the previous 28.4 degrees, so that was in Clonmel and in Killarney.
And that's your latest news update at 7:04.
Stay updated at Midlands183.com.
Need an oil boiler? Go to Heatwise. Need a gas boiler? Go to Heatwise. Need a circulating pump or hot water cylinder? Go to Heatwise. Need a kitchen tap or sink? Yep, go to Heatwise. Need a fitting or a pipe? Heatwise. Heatwise, Cloncollig, Tullamore. Selling quality heating and plumbing products since 1985. Heatwise.ie.
Love the Midlands? Love. Let's Go Green, sponsored by AirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I'm your host, Aisling O'Rourke, and you are very welcome to this week's episode of the show. A little bit later on, we're going to be talking about our gardens and what we can do to try and prevent invasive species from causing trouble. I will also be discussing one of my favourite topics, and that is green hushing. But first things first, we are joined by a man who has, as I understand it, and he will correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, has created a system which we were told would take a decade in a matter of months. And I'm joined now by Gavyn Pedley of FloodPredictor.ie. Gavyn, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Aisling. I appreciate it.
Now, Gavyn, FloodPredictor.ie, like, you know, in my world of communications, we always say make it plain English, make it easy to follow, and that website title tells me a lot about what it is. So how exactly did you come to creating Flood Predictor?
Well, I have an odd career. I'm an innovation specialist by trade, and I work primarily in the food and beverage industry. And a kind of artifact of that is, you know, when you're looking at launching a new product, you have to figure out where to put it, and you have to understand that it's actually going to make money. And I've done this for companies all over the place. So I spend a lot of time nerding out about data. And, you know, once you crash a computer a few hundred times using Excel, you start getting a little bit more advanced with different tools and stuff like that. So I've been playing with numbers for years. And a big interest for me has always been, I mean, part of the job is trying to figure out what's going to happen next year when I launch this product. So you have to be able to do that across these huge big data sets. Anyway, that's just the sort of setup for it. That's the bit that I find interesting about the work. But
so you are a bit of a data nerd. Like, let's be blunt about it.
Yeah, I get a little tickle down the back of my neck when I see more than 60,000 lines in an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know why. I know it's weird, but it's one of those.
Whereas that would that would send me into sheer panic mode. And even though I have had to accept that spreadsheets are now part of my life, I definitely do not claim to enjoy it, but each to their own, Gavyn. You know, if it's what makes you happy, fair play. Now, that's it. Like, we here in the Midlands, unfortunately, we've been hit by floods, and quite severe ones over the years. And I know, like, luckily on a personal level, I've never had one in my own home, and I touch wood that stays the case. But over recent years, we've seen the footage, we've seen the images. If we've not experienced it, we have a fair idea of the terror that water can cause. So you decided, in your wisdom, to go from, you know, the food and beverage industry into putting all of this data nerdiness into action on flooding. What was it that inspired you to see, could you do something about it?
So, when I moved back to Ireland a couple of years back, well, probably 2 years ago now. We're living in Enniscorthy, and you know, we went through last winter, and you know, there's a lot of wind and a lot of like storms and stuff, and it's kind of awe-inspiring when you see these you know, moments where nature really shows you just how small you are, right? So on the day the flooding actually happens in a place like Enniscorthy, that's the first thought you have. You're like, oh wow, this is just an incredible thing to witness, to actually stand there and see this wall of water running through the middle of a town. But that's not the bit that sticks with you. What sticks with you is 2 weeks later when you're driving down the street. Like, I was dropping my kid to school, and it was just the whole road all the way from one side of Enniscorthy to the other was just skips. And there's, you know, hundreds of people just pulling their lives apart and throwing them into skips, and the devastation. But it's the devastation that lasts over months. Like, only 3 or 4 weeks ago, like we're near enough the end of May. We're in the middle of the summer, and I was driving down that same road, and I watched some neighbours pull a staircase out of their house. It's like 4 months after the flood, and it's like the people are still experiencing the moment it happened in real time. It's awful. But the catalyst for me was, I was dropping my little one to school, and I looked out the window as I was driving down, and I saw this guy standing outside the house, and he had in his hands a sopping wet kid's duvet, right? You're talking, the small ones that go on a single bed, probably a 5-year-old. It's got like superheroes on it or something like that. And the second I saw, there's something about his face, I'll never forget it. And I don't think I can actually put into words what that man's face was saying. But it reminded me of the duvet that's on my kid's bed now. It's a little dinosaur duvet, and I could not throw that out. And, for the next, 80 seconds was nothing but heartbreak as I drove through the town. And as I hit the bridge, I realised that it's calculable. It's not even like the first model was junior cert level maths. It's a bucket with a tap over it and a hole in it. And if there's more coming out of the tap than there is going out the hole, you get a flood, right? It's not rocket science. So I started thinking about it a lot. And a couple of days later, George Lee wrote an article, and he pointed out that all the data was there. And I was like, right, okay, well, I've had this mad career where all of this stuff becomes, kind of normal to me. I'm going to sit down and think about this. Can I do a job here on this? So I started pulling the data together, and about a month goes by where I'm kind of relentlessly sitting there thinking about how to put it together. And then I just started building it. And I didn't stop, because every time I got tired, it was that man's face that was right in front of me. It was that kid's duvet. I was like, if I can answer that question on a purely neighbourly basis, on a purely civic duty basis, we're all in this together. There's only 5 million of us, right? We got to look after each other a little bit. I can answer that question, possibly. I owe it to him to do it before this happens again. And everyone else who's going to experience this. So that drove me at a pace, basically. And over the course of the next month or so, I got it working, and I started seeing real, actual results from the models. And I'm still working on it. I was working on it before we started chatting here. I've been adding data to it. I'm adding new layers to it the whole time to try and make it more and more accurate, to help me learn more about what's going on. And we're at the point now where it's not just saying, there's a percentage chance of flooding, because ultimately all of this wraps itself around thinking probabilistically, which is naturally a difficult thing anyway. So, one of the things that I wanted to do with it was to just skip straight to the bit that's really important, right? If you live near a place like the Slaney and there's a flood on the way, call it 72 hours out, you get a warning saying, hey, there's going to be a lot of rain, 65% chance it's going to flood. And there's variations and gradients to that. There's like a 65% chance it'll flood, and maybe half of that is a metre, so that's roughly how much you might have to expect. And then as it gets closer to the event, that goes up and up and up, and it's at that point it stops really being about the probabilities and it starts being about what's actually written on the site, which is pay attention to the river, move your car, start taking stuff from downstairs and putting it upstairs. Maybe search for accommodation for the night because you're in a flood zone. That's the really critical stuff that you need to know about.
Okay.
That's what starts popping up in front of you. It's no longer the numbers. You in a situation like that, you do not need to think, right? There's a wall of water coming your way. You need to move. And that's why it's really, it's about making that information concretely clear as to what to do, not why it's there. Not like, Met Éireann's yellow warnings are great. They tell you what they're supposed to. But a yellow warning doesn't tell you whether or not to move your car. FloodPredictor will tell you to move your car. That's what it's for.
Okay.
It's so that the next time it happens, that's the effect it has.
And I think even those in the powers that be would admit that. And I'll be honest, I've done it myself, where I see a yellow warning and I think, I'm grand, it's only yellow. But that's not the intention of the yellow warning. The intention of the yellow warning going, actually, there are dangerous conditions, you should take more care on the road, whatever it might be. I might not need to evacuate, but I still do need to take measures. So, so you are in this bubble, you're clearly passionate about it, you've been this has become your baby. For the likes of me, who's not inside your head, okay, or the regular person who lives in Enniscorthy or anywhere across the country that's in a flood zone, what does the website do? Does it send me an email, a text message? Do I need to log in? Like, what does it actually look like?
Yeah. So first and foremost, the data that it's made of is public data. So the main site, the main bulk of the site, it's completely free to use. Log on, click on a station, and it's the one that's nearest your house, and it will tell you the chance of it flooding right now. So you can just watch that whenever you want. And I've also built an app that you can download on the website. And in a couple of days' time, I have the great benefit of it not flooding currently, so I can test that everything is working. And that's really what I'm working on at the minute, is just making sure it's resilient. 200,000 people looked at the website yesterday and nothing major broke. I got most of it fixed fairly quick. But, it's ultimately what will happen is if there's a flood in your area and it goes above a certain threshold, that's when you'll get a ping. And you'll get a little pop up on your phone saying, "Hey, there's it's worth paying attention now." And it'll give you that kind of how to understand it level probability. If there's a 50-50 chance of it's flooding, it's going to say you're looking at a coin toss. Would you bet your house on a coin toss, depending on where you live? That's there to make it really kind of hit you in the chest as to what's happening, a couple of $100 of sandbags on a 50-50 chance of losing 20 grand worth of house. I think I'd probably bet on the sandbags, but that's ultimately what it's for. What I want it to be is a national flood risk tool. If there's a flood coming your way, you need a little bit of forward notice. And that's what it's there for. There are features that go beyond that cost me in terms of compute and in terms of server space and all of that fun stuff. And right now I'm just paying for that myself. But that's it. I just want people to know there's a flood on the way. I don't want to have to drive down to town and think I didn't answer that question, because these are my neighbours. And I've got to stand in front of them every now and again when I'm outside school dropping kiddo, or I'm just up and down for a pint, or I'm in the post office, So it's kind of my job too, right?
An Oireachtas committee hearing was told that something like this would take a decade to develop. And I'm curious, because this is out in the public domain now. Have you gotten a response from the powers that be, or any feedback on this as a product or a civic service?
No. One of the things that I'm quite serious about with Flood Predictor is accountability, right? So when I built the model, so it's my model, and as a result, I publish what's known as a BREER score, which is my measure of accuracy. It's the same one that Met Éireann used for their weather people, and what it says is that the broad strokes are: if I say there's a 70% chance of rain as a weatherman, I'm either 30% wrong or 70% right, and I can use that gap to make ever so slight adjustments as I go through my career, and that you get more accurate. So a 0.1 is really good for weather forecasting. The lower the number, the better.
Okay.
The model I've built does a 0.0009. It's ridiculously accurate in comparison. And I publish those numbers so everyone can go and have a look and see how accurate it is, right? And it'll get more accurate the whole time. But the other side of accountability is I can't stop the flood. I can tell you when it's coming. However, there are people out there whose job it is to respond to these things. And two things kind of occur to me, right? One is the question, why does it take 10 years? I don't really know, because it didn't take me 10 years to build. But what I can say is I can understand why, when you look at the varying departments in government and you ask, is it the OPW's job? Probably not. They've got the river monitors. They've got a lot on their plate already, right? It's probably not their job. Is it Met Éireann's job? They're supposed to look up, not down. So it, and they do have a department that's looking at it. But again, maybe that's not what's going on there. And Teagasc work for the farming community, and so the question comes down to, when they say 10 to 15 years, what do they actually mean? And I haven't really had any response to that. And I'm not really pushing the issue. What I am saying is that as a person with the capability of doing it, I'll do it if nobody else will. And it might take them 10 to 15 years to put a government department together for it. But between now and then, I'm going to make sure that what I can do as a person is up in there. I can kind of understand it, but at the same time, how many other things could you put that same label on across the Irish political spectrum, What I can't stand, though, is the lack of reaction. So part of what Flood Predictor does is that, and this is a system that I have, what day are we? We're at the 19th. I have promised myself I will turn this system on by the end of the month, last day of the month, is an automated email system. And when a station shows a prediction higher than a certain level, like we're getting into, people need to really know about this now. It's not just the people with the app that get it. I'll also be sending an automated email to the local TD and to the local council. And then every time it goes up at a certain level, they'll keep getting these notifications. And all of those notifications will be visible on Flood Predictor. So there is never going to be a situation again where a TD can say, I didn't know, or the yellow warning wasn't clear enough. You got an email from me, mate. And I told you when, where, and how. And that's baked into it. But that's, that's Flood Predictor. On top of that, I'm also working on a second bit of work that's designed for first responders so that they can see what's going on in a sort of macro sense, And part of that is being able to tell you if there's flooding at, say, Scarrow Walsh, which is just a little further up from Enniscorthy, how long is that water going to take to get to Enniscorthy? 1 hour and 48 minutes is the answer, right? Being able to funnel that to the person who's actually on the ground and then tell them exactly where the low points are in the town, that's the next phase of what I'm doing. So, because another side of it is like local councils, completely understandably funded by the government, if they make the wrong decision in a moment like that and they put everyone in the exact wrong spot, or they build flood defences in completely wrong spot, someone is going to go, why did you do that? There's a kind of culpability requirement there. And that's a reasonable thing to do in a democracy, is to look at that kind of thing. But when you have a LiDAR map and you can see how water moves through that space, you can make it much more obvious. And what I want is not necessarily a response to why it takes 10 years to do. I'd like someone to come along and work with me on this one, because I can tell you these 3 spots you need to block up right now in Enniscorthy to stop the town flooding, because it's right there on the map. It's not overcomplicated, really. But that's the thing. I think to some degree it's kind of mad that it takes that length of time. But the other side of it, I think we should kind of all lean in on stuff like this here and there,
And then, like, technology being technology, it crashes. Okay, we've all had situations where, you might need to ring up the IT support line and have you turned it off and on again. Something along those lines. So in a situation like this, can you be confident that you can rely on it? Because we've all had systems crash on us, I think, at this point. And I think, and whether or not we can trust that it's going to stay working affects whether or not we can trust the information that we're getting from anything. And I'm guessing that is a big concern when you're trying to do this as a solopreneur, effectively.
Yeah. So first things first, it lives its life on a server. It's backed up 3 times. And each one of them has another backup on top. So the likelihood of the data going anywhere is pretty small. Really the thing is internet connection. That's going to be the thing. It won't be necessarily Flood Predictor. It'll be whether or not the local mast has survived the storm. You get something like Chandra might blow that down and interrupt the internet signal. That could cause problems. Which is why it's designed to give you a good few hours. We're talking 72 hours of a nod. By the time it gets to 80-90%, I mean, you're moving already at that stage. So, and this is the kind of thing that happens in advance of a storm hitting. There's nothing I can do about a storm knocking out a radio tower. But what I can do is make sure that the back end tech is really resilient. And I spend a lot of time sitting there making sure, I'd say, I'd imagine probably the first week of that month was actual design work, and the rest of it was architecture to solve that exact problem. And it's got to be resilient. Can't go down if a bunch of people look at it at the same time, especially when it comes to a flood, because I fully expect no one to look at this thing until, November. But when you're looking at it, it might be hundreds of thousands of people who check on it on the same day.
It's the same as
so
when
I've built it for that.
It's like powercheck.ie, the electricity platform. None of us checks it on a day-to-day basis. But if you hear on social media that there's power outages near you, all of a sudden we all get on it and make sure that we're not affected by it. So it's human nature, and you need to have the infrastructure in place. Gavyn, fair play to you. And I mean that sincerely. Like, the world has gotten so divisive. To see somebody, do something for civic good is quite refreshing. So thank you for taking the time to come and join us and talk to us about it on Let's Go Green. And I hope you get a few hits on FloodPredictor.ie after this chat goes out on air. But thank you so much for your time.
No problem, Alison. Cheers.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by AirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and I'm delighted now to be joined by Kate Moore. And Kate is the Invasive Species Engagement Officer with the National Biodiversity Data Centre. Kate, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me, Aisling.
Kate, at this time of year, many people, myself included, we look at the garden and think, God, it'd be nice to have a bit more colour, wouldn't it? And, you know, it's very easy to get a little bit excited about it and to go off to the local garden centre or even shop online and just randomly pick up plants, shrubs, flowers, whatever word you want to use. But it's important that we check how good they are for the environment around us, isn't it?
Yes, it is important, but I would say, first of all, that we should get to know what's actually growing in our gardens before we even head out to the shop or go shopping online for plants, because often we don't actually know what we have. So it's good to know what you're growing in your garden initially, and to see is there native plants there, or maybe potentially there could be some invasive ones that we might have to remove or do some management on. And then if you do choose to go out and buy plants, it would be important to do a bit of research before you buy any plants to check if potentially they could be invasive ones. So people can go on to our website, invasive.ie, to see which ones are invasive and which ones are regulated, and can see which ones to avoid then when they do go out to buy plants.
Because I think it's a subject that causes a lot of confusion. We can go to any garden centre or any shop that sells plants, like not to single out garden centres, and we can buy plants that are labelled as being grown in Ireland, or they might be in maybe a pollinator-friendly section. And there's all these terminology.
Yes.
And that can really make it like people can feel like they're doing the right thing. You can go in and think, yeah, right, that's brilliant, that's grown here, that means that's safe here. But that's not always the case, is it?
No, unfortunately, there are some retailers out there, and I've just heard a story today of an Irish retailer that is selling bluebells, which are labelled as native bluebells, but were actually the non-native variety, the Spanish bluebell. So we do need to be very careful, and we need to interrogate what we're buying and to make sure it is what it says on the packet. And just in terms of planting for pollinators and for biodiversity, I would recommend that people check out pollinators.ie, and there's great resources there about what people can do in their garden to help pollinators and biodiversity. And a lot of it is actually about just reducing mowing and taking a step back and kind of letting nature do its thing. So people might want to look at those resources before they do head out and start buying plants.
And some of these plants that are considered to be invasive species, it'll surprise people because some of them have very beautiful colours and very beautiful flowers. Yes. So first things first, how does a plant or a shrub or whatever language you want to use, what's the process involved in them being labelled as being an invasive species?
Yeah, so I suppose over time we've learned that some species are invasive because they have spread from where they were planted and made their way into the environment, and unfortunately have had an impact on our nature areas. So one example that people might be aware of is Rhododendron ponticum, which was planted as an ornamental in gardens around the 19th century and has since spread into our native woodlands and is having a serious impact there. So the process for assigning a species as invasive is what we call risk assessment. So scientists will look at the properties of the plant and go to the literature and examples of where this is having an issue, or if it is having an issue, and compile that data, and based on a scoring system, they will assign a level of risk to it. And from there, it can be passed on to the government to decide whether that species should be added to the regulated list of invasive species. And those species are illegal to grow, they're illegal to sell or to share. So, rhododendron would be an example of one of those species.
So we shouldn't see rhododendron for sale in shops in Ireland?
No, we shouldn't see rhododendron ponticum for sale, but there are other varieties of rhododendron that are not regulated because it has been proven that they're not invasive. So some people might see other varieties of rhododendron in the shops, but it's rhododendron ponticum, which is the regulated species.
Okay, so, and there are restrictions then, you're telling us, about what is allowed and what is permitted for sale here.
Exactly, yes, there is. So if people want to find the list of regulated species, they can go on to invasive.ie, and we have a section there on legislation, and they will find the list there. And we also have an identification guide, which people can view for free on our website there as well, which will help people identify the regulated plants.
Okay, because sometimes you might, like I know, and I've said this before on the programme, I bought my own house last year, which came with a nice little garden, and I spent much of the summer and even parts of this year watching things grow and then try to figure out, taking pictures and uploading onto the internet and trying to figure out what exactly I have to deal with. And, if you're not a horticulturalist, it all can be, it can be enjoyable, but also a little bit daunting because you want to do the right thing, but it can be hard to know what to do.
Yeah, so I guess in the first instance, if you can take a photo, and if you're concerned if you can't ID the species, you can submit it to us on invasive.ie, and we can confirm whether it is an invasive one or not. So there's tons of resources on our website as well, and people can also go on to the Citizen Science portal and search for a species if they know the name of it already, and it will say underneath whether it's designated as an invasive plant.
So then, now I know that in the biodiversity, the data centre, you're providing the information and I suppose educating us in the public around all of this. And you're not going to come out to my garden, for example, and dig out any invasive species. But where do we go? If we identify that something is an invasive species, what's the next step?
Yeah, so I would always recommend first that people confirm the identification if they're not sure. As I said, they can contact us, or we have loads of resources. And then for some species, if they want to manage them or control them, they may be able to do that themselves. It might just involve digging out the bulbs or the plant, or controlling the spread of the seed. But for others, it's a bit trickier, and often you may need herbicide to deal with them, and there are restrictions around that. So for those more difficult species, I would recommend people go to an environmental consultant to get the expert advice. And it's important to make a plan when you're doing this, and to make sure that you're doing it correctly, because if we don't do it correctly, often we can end up spreading these plants further. So particularly with something like Japanese knotweed, that one is a really tricky one to deal with. So I always tell people to go to a specialist for that.
I remember being on holidays out west a couple of years ago now, but seeing signs along road edges like, this is a Japanese knotweed area, we are managing it, so please do not interfere with it, because it is so lethal that it can spread so easily. So we do have to be careful. So the first step, I suppose, as you say, identify it, get some help in so that you don't make a bigger problem for yourself.
Exactly. And there are some resources, again, on invasive.ie where people can learn about management. We do have some resources there, but I would say you do need to be careful about disposal of regulated plant species. So it would be important to check with your local authority about disposal of those. And also, if anybody was moving a regulated species off a site, they would need to apply for a licence from the National Parks and Wildlife Service.
Oh, right. Okay. So if you thought maybe you had a bit of maybe some woodland and some rhododendron ponticum had arrived, there is paperwork to be filled out to deal with that.
Yes, particularly if you're moving it. So there are restrictions around moving these regulated species. So it's really important to get in contact with the National Parks and Wildlife Service if you are going to do anything like that.
I know that on your social media channels in recent weeks, you've put this call out for gardeners to be more aware of this as an issue, because I think some people, and even listening to our conversation, might think, oh, that's something for people with loads of land and farmers and woodlands to be worrying about. Why is it that gardeners need to be aware of the situation?
I think it's, well, I would say like most people do have a garden or some type of outdoor space. So again, we have a responsibility to make sure that what we are putting in our garden doesn't interfere with the wider environment, and to make sure that we're careful in what we're putting into our garden. So that would be the main thing, really, is just to take a bit of time to do your research before you're planting anything new. Because we all have that responsibility as landowners, I guess, to make sure we're not impacting on the environment.
And I know that you're working on resources then to help us do this job.
Yes, so we're currently working on some guidance for gardeners that hopefully we'll be able to publish soon, and that will provide, tips for, if you do want to buy plants, and also about biosecurity. So biosecurity is basically just simple measures we can take to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species. So things like keeping your garden tools and equipment clean, not sharing plants. If you have a pond, make sure you're not introducing invasives into the pond or letting animals from your pond escape into the environment. So that should be available soon. And we're also working with some botanists on an alternative plant list, which will be a list of species, both native and non-native, that people can plant but are proven not to be invasive. So there's alternatives there. So we give an example of, what the invasive species is, like something like Buddleia or butterfly bush, and then beside that, then we have the ones that they can plant. But my advice would definitely be to try to plant native if you can, because that usually is the best for biodiversity. And even if you don't want to plant, again, like, you can reduce mowing, and that will encourage the native wildflowers to grow, which is absolutely fabulous for our bees and other pollinators.
And all of that will be available on invasives.ie?
Yes, exactly. So hopefully we'll have those resources very soon. And for anyone attending Bloom in next weekend, we will have a stand there. So feel free to come up to us and ask us questions. Yeah.
Well, Kate Moore, the Invasive Species Engagement Officer at the National Biodiversity Data Centre, thank you so much for joining us on Let's Go Green. We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and I am delighted to be joined by Andrew Sheehan of Sustainability Examples. Andrew, you are very welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much, Aisling. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. I really appreciate it.
Now, Andrew, the topic that we're about to discuss, you got in contact with me to suggest it as an item for the show, which I always love. And I'm always encouraging listeners to the show and the podcast to drop me an email to hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. We love getting ideas from our listenership, but the broader community as well, for items here on the show. But Andrew, you wanted to talk about this concept of green hushing. Now, it's been a while since we talked about it here on Let's Go Green. So for the uninitiated, what is green hushing?
Green hushing is a process of companies not talking up about what they are doing in terms of corporate sustainability initiatives, whether they're environmental, social or governance related, in simple terms.
And why is this an issue? Like, why should we care about it?
Well, the main reason why we should really care about it, because some would argue that it's actually doing more harm than greenwashing. It's not to underestimate the importance of greenwashing, and we're all quite familiar with that concept as well. But its evil cousin, if you will, is green hushing. And what green hushing is doing is effectively letting the laggards prevail. It's putting out this perception that nothing is happening. And when people feel that nothing is happening, then they say, well, why would I start taking action as an organisation if my competitors are not? And so when we start entering in this space of there's no movement, then that creates a new, really nasty narrative that nothing is happening, when it's quite the contrary. There's statistics coming out every day, and most recently from a Harvard Business Review article, that 85% of companies interviewed, about 4,000 companies interviewed, are still on course to their commitments and to implementing corporate sustainability initiatives. But when they're not speaking about that, people assume that no one's doing anything, and as a result, the laggards prevail.
It's this idea that if you're not talking about the actions that you're taking, a vacuum is created, and that's where the false narrative, the extreme views come in some instances. And in this instance, it's where, well, cynicism can grow. Because like you're saying, if I'm not talking about my efforts to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly minded in my social media content, for want of a better example, then the assumption is that solopreneurs like me are doing nothing. So a solopreneur down the road might think, well, there's no point in me even trying.
Yeah, absolutely, Aisling. You're absolutely right. And it's a marketing concept, really, underlying it all, in that, as a marketer, if you have all these different social media channels for, to put it into a bit of context, if you're not posting on each of those channels, then you look dormant and you look like you're maybe out of business, when you're not at all. You just don't have time. But so, it's very important that we speak about what we're doing, choosing our channels effectively, such as sustainabilityexamples.com, and going from there and letting the world know that action is being happening. And when the laggards see that, they won't be able to help themselves but to start taking action themselves. And that's where we really win.
And is there, Andrew, some fear involved in all of this as well? Because I'll talk about, I don't mind failing in public. I'll try things out, but I'm not perfect. I'm not a saint, and I'm always very honest about it. So I might try to create a more, it's not related to my work per se, but a biodiversity friendly garden now that I own a garden and I have to mind one. But I know it's not going to be perfect. And is it this concept that if we're going to talk about our sustainable efforts, then we have to be perfect in every way. And if we're not perfect in every way, well, then I can't talk about it because it's not done yet.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right, Aisling. That really falls into one of the categories of hesitancy. And I've really boiled green hushing down to 3 core categories that I've found trending over the last 18 months. The top one is definitely fear, right? So a lot of organizations are just really terrified to say anything that they're doing because of, a greenwashing backlash, but also regulation that's coming down the line as well that they don't quite understand. And when you don't understand something, similar to greenwashing, people have different definitions of greenwashing. And as a result of this ambiguity, if you don't understand something, you fear it. And when you fear something, you just stay still and don't do anything. Keep the head down. And that's one of the categories of green hushing that I've found.
And I think people are really afraid, and sorry to cut across you, but just on that fear one, just expand on it. I think people really are afraid of backlash on social media, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And, it's funny, it kind of comes into what you mentioned there about perfection. And the thing about corporate sustainability, or communicating with credibility and honesty, is that when you're vulnerable and when you tell people your imperfections and when you tell people where your challenges were and how you overcame them, it just removes any potential of backlash, because you're letting people know that this is what we're doing, right? We don't have all the answers, but we're trying. And if anyone has any opinions, help us out. We'd be all ears. Whereas if you go out and overstate what you're doing, which is greenwashing, or if you go out and say something that maybe hasn't been validated or verified and you pretend that it's perfect when it's really not, that's where you can have a little bit of backlash. But if you're vulnerable in your comms and you're honest in your comms, no one can say anything, really. And that's a big point to make.
And I think that really makes it, more achievable for people who have been hesitant around it.
The thing with corporate sustainability is so achievable. It can be overwhelming though with abbreviations, 70-page reports, and the potential backlash associated with greenwashing or regulations. But really, in its simplicity, is showing the world, whether it's a tiny initiative or a huge initiative, that you're doing it. It's not perfect, but we're making progress. And if you're vulnerable and open to that, then people will get behind it and support you, which is what one of the things on sustainabilityexamples.com does. So one category... Sorry.
So we said one category was fear. So what are the others?
Yeah, so there's 3 categories I found trending in greenwashing. So one category is definitely fear. The next category that you tipped on was hesitancy, right? And hesitancy is that whole area of we're not perfect, so we just won't say anything. And they're hesitant about saying anything because they assume that everything has to be perfect. But here's the reality. When it comes to corporate sustainability, there's no such thing as perfection. And that's a real narrative that's coming through a lot now, which is fantastic. And we need a lot more of it. I think at the beginning, kind of like CSR days, corporate social responsibility, everything had to be pretty perfect, whereas now there's more information, there's more knowledge. So it's not about perfection anymore. It's about honesty, progress. Right. And then, but what also feeds into hesitancy category is, and this is a common cause, a lot of these SMEs and larger SMEs and medium SMEs, they don't have a marketing department, a lot of them. And so they actually struggle to even communicate on a mass level. And because they're not good storytellers, or because they don't have the time to be telling stories, because a lot of us don't, they just don't say anything either. So the micro SMEs, the medium SMEs, the small SMEs, who are all, I know for a fact, are taking action, they just don't have the resources or the skill capability to be able to share that in a way that they're not hesitant to do so.
And that's what makes, I think, a show like this one particularly special, because I get to talk to these business people on a regular basis about all the things that they are doing, because I do know there's a lot of cynicism in Ireland around sustainability, progress around, because we're not meeting yet, and we've an awful lot more work to do on a national level and to get to all of those like EU targets for 2030 and all that. But that doesn't mean that smaller companies are doing nothing. That it's just that we have this opportunity here on this programme to talk about what smaller companies are doing. And talk to me then, because you've mentioned it there as well, like you're doing a lot to help in this department. You've established sustainabilityexamples.com. So what exactly is it?
It's very simply, it's a platform that enables organisations to share what they're doing in terms of corporate sustainability. And we focus very much on the examples of what they're doing and the storytelling aspect of what they're doing, because people resonate with stories and examples. And each of the examples that they share, whether it's an energy initiative, a waste initiative, a hiring initiative, such as hiring a sustainability person, and they're all tied to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as well. So it's a platform that is tied to an international framework, and because real people in real companies are sharing real examples of progress that are tied to UN SDGs, it's making sustainability very practical and understandable and adoptable, which is really important as well. So yes, it's a tool, it's a platform where companies can showcase what they're doing, their progress over perfection, start generating commercial uplifts for taking action, right? And that's fair. We all, it's important that companies, the good companies, benefit commercially for taking action. But also it's very much a learning platform as well. So for those organizations who are not familiar or not aware or how to start, or not aware of how to really communicate what they're already doing effectively, they can use the examples that are already there to start their own journeys or to help them communicate their own efforts. And they'll realize through the stories and examples that are there, that a lot of them are very simple, basic. Their language is very simple, basic, vulnerable, that I mentioned as well previously. And that just builds people's confidence in the space to be able to talk about what they're doing. And when we all start talking about what we're doing, a movement keeps moving and gets bigger and bigger. So that's a little bit about it. We gamify it as well. So for a lot of listeners, one side of the platform is companies sharing what they're doing, but the other side we call champions. And they're the people who are coming to the platform to be able to discover, but also engage with these examples. And they can engage with them by upvoting them. They can engage with them by sharing them. And that engagement also really encourages the people in these companies who are sharing what they're doing. Because when they see that their examples are getting viewed, upvoted, shared, that's recognition.
And then you're getting buoyed up by that recognition and encouraged to keep going with the work that you're doing. Well, look,
there you go.
I hope that we're doing, between us here on Let's Go Green, yourself on Sustainability Examples and all of the contributors to Let's Go Green each and every week, that we're doing our bit to combat green hushing. But for now, Andrew Sheehan of Sustainability Examples, thank you very much for joining us on Let's Go Green.
No problem. Thank you so much, Aisling.
We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. Now, I'd like to remind you, if you were interested in that piece with Kate Moore earlier on from the National Biodiversity Data Centre, that website that Kate mentioned, if you would like to find out more about invasive species, the website is, of course, invasives.ie. And Kate and her colleagues are working on creating resources so that we can, identify invasive species, but just learn more about the plants around us that might already be in the garden or, on the land that we own, operate on or manage, so that we can be more mindful of what we're putting in place and the impact that they will have. And of course, the hope would be to prevent the spread of non-native species that can do damage to the environment around us. Things like Japanese knotweed, also that particular type of rhododendron, the Rhododendron ponticum, which I know in many parts of the country is of huge concern. Now look, I'm no saint in this regard. I've made mistakes in my own garden, I'm positive, but I suppose it's all about educating ourselves so that going forward we can make the best decisions possible and at least be informed when we do go out and about to pick up plants or maybe, and I know it's very popular to share cuttings and seedlings, but maybe to only accept them if they are biodiversity friendly in our particular neck of the woods. Anyway, the work that Kate and her colleagues are doing putting a great deal of effort into, all of that information is available on invasives.ie. Now, this will be my last programme for a little while here on Let's Go Green on Midlands 103. I'm going to be taking the next couple of weeks off the show to go and take some time out. My first holiday in 2 years, so I'm very much looking forward to it. So Zoe Ryan will be stepping in for me over the next couple of weeks. So I do hope that you get in contact with her if there is something that you would like covered on Let's Go Green in the next couple of weeks. But as always, this is a community-driven programme. So if there is something that you would like covered here on Let's Go Green, please do get in contact with us. You can contact me directly. hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. So that's hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. You can also go to midlands103.com, click on the On Air Team button, and then you will see an option for Aisling O'Rourke, Let's Go Green. And that allows you to fill out a form and send me an email too. Anything that you might send over the next couple of weeks to me, I will be sure to pass on to Zoe. And I just want to take a moment to say thanks, Zoe,